Some endings don't hurt, and that is exactly what makes them confusing. You expected pain. You expected grief. You expected something to break. But instead, there was silence. No argument, no collapse. No moment you can point to and say, that's when it ended. Just a quiet knowing that something is over. And that silence makes people uncomfortable. They ask, why don't I feel more? They wonder if something is wrong with them. They worry that calm means they didn't care enough. But Ibn Arabi teaches something very different. He teaches that when Allah ends something without noise, it is not neglect. It is not loss. It is completion. Some chapters are not closed with pain. They are closed with certainty. And if you are listening to this, it is because a phase in your life ended quietly, and you didn't know how to explain it. This message is not here to reopen what Allah already resolved. It is here to help you recognize why the silence itself was mercy. Listen carefully, because what ended without noise was never meant to be carried forward, and what Allah finishes quietly does not return. 1. Not every ending requires pain. We have been conditioned to believe that if something truly mattered, its ending must hurt. That grief is proof. That tears are evidence. That pain is the price of meaning. But Ibn Arabi dismantles this belief at its root. He teaches that pain does not come from endings. Pain comes from attachment that outlives purpose. When Allah ends something loudly, it is often because the heart is still clinging. When He ends something quietly, it is because the heart has already let go, even if the mind hasn't caught up yet. This is why some endings feel strange instead of painful. You don't collapse. You don't cry the way you expected. You don't feel relief either. You just feel finished. That feeling confuses people. They ask, why don't I feel more? They assume something is wrong. But Ibn Arabi would say, nothing is wrong. Something is complete. When an ending arrives without pain, it means Allah has already removed the emotional charge before removing the situation itself. The bond dissolved first. The form followed later. This is divine gentleness, because pain is not always necessary for growth. Sometimes clarity replaces it. You don't mourn what no longer belongs to you. You don't grieve what has already released you internally. That is why this ending did not demand tears. It did not need drama. It did not announce itself. It simply stopped asking for your energy. And that is the clearest sign of maturity. In the spiritual path, the loudest suffering happens when we refuse to move on. But the quietest endings happen when Allah knows you no longer need suffering to learn. So if this phase ended without pain, do not accuse your heart of being cold. Do not force grief to prove sincerity. Your calm is not indifference. It is alignment. And according to Ibn Arabi, alignment is the soul's way of saying, this lesson has been fully received. 2. Silence is a sign of completion. We mistake silence for absence. We assume that when nothing happens, nothing has happened. But Ibn Arabi teaches the opposite. He says that noise belongs to interruption, but silence belongs to completion. When something is unfinished, it resists. It echoes. It demands attention. But when Allah completes a matter, it does not shout. It settles. Think carefully about what just ended in your life. There was no argument, no dramatic turning point, no final conversation that gave you answers. It simply stopped calling you. That is not confusion. That is resolution. Ibn Arabi explains that Allah does not always remove situations. Sometimes He removes their meaning. The moment meaning leaves, struggle ends. You didn't fight to hold on, because there was nothing left to fight for. The energy that once pulled you in simply disappeared. And when meaning is withdrawn, the heart becomes quiet, not because it is empty, but because it is no longer divided. This is why the silence feels different from loneliness. Loneliness aches. This silence does not. This silence feels neutral, still, final. That is the signature of divine completion. If Allah had ended this phase while it still served a purpose, your heart would have protested. you would have felt tension, regret, unanswered questions. But instead, you felt a strange calm, even if you didn't understand it. That calm is not ignorance, it is agreement. Your soul recognized the ending before your thoughts could analyze it. And this is important. Silence does not mean nothing is coming. It means nothing is being argued anymore. Ibn Arabi teaches that when Allah finishes a chapter completely, He leaves no emotional residue behind, no loose threads, no lingering pull, just a quiet internal yes. So if you are standing in silence right now, stop asking, why don't I feel more? Ask instead, what has already been resolved within me? Because when Allah completes something fully, He does not leave noise behind. He leaves peace. 3. Allah closed it gently because you were ready. Not every heart can survive a sudden ending. Some endings come with shock, grief, and collapse because the soul is not prepared to release what it still believes it needs. But when Allah ends something gently, it is a sign of readiness. Ibn Arabi explains that divine gentleness is not softness, it is precision. Allah is exact in how He moves the heart. If this phase ended without force, without conflict, without emotional injury, it is because you had already outgrown it, even if you didn't realize it yet. Growth often happens quietly. One day, you wake up and notice. You don't argue the same way. You don't cling the same way. You don't need reassurance the same way. And because of that inner shift, Allah does not need to break anything externally. He simply closes the door. Violent endings are for attachments that are still alive. Quiet endings are for attachments that have already expired. This is why there was no internal panic when it ended. No scrambling, no begging, just acceptance. That acceptance is not weakness. It is spiritual maturity. Ibn Arabi teaches that Allah does not tear away what you are still dependent on. He waits until dependence dissolves naturally. Only then does He end the phase. So when something ends gently, it means Allah trusted you with the closure. He did not overwhelm you with pain. He did not test your endurance again. He honored your readiness. This is an important truth many people miss. Readiness is not excitement. It is neutrality. When the heart no longer reacts, it is prepared. That is why the ending felt soft instead of sharp, why it felt calm instead of devastating. Allah did not spare you because the phase was small. He spared you because you had become strong enough not to need suffering as a teacher anymore. And according to Ibn Arabi, that is one of the clearest signs that a servant has progressed. If Allah ended this chapter gently in your life, do not underestimate what that says about you. It means the lesson was learned, the attachment was released, and the soul was ready to move forward without being pushed. 4. The absence of explanation is mercy. We are taught to believe that healing requires answers. That closure depends on understanding. That peace comes after explanation. But Ibn Arabi teaches something far more subtle. Sometimes Allah withholds explanation to protect you from delay, because explanation can become a trap. If Allah had explained why this phase ended, the mind would have replayed it. If He had shown how, the ego would have negotiated. If He had justified when, the heart might have resisted. So instead, Allah ended it quietly without commentary. Not because you didn't deserve answers, but because answers would have kept you emotionally entangled with what was already finished. This is mercy. There are moments when understanding does not liberate, it binds. It invites rumination. It keeps the door psychologically open. Ibn Arabi explains that Allah removes explanation when the soul is ready for acceptance without reasoning. That is a high station. It means your heart no longer needs to be convinced. It means your soul can trust the ending without proof. This is why the absence of explanation feels strange, but not painful. You are not confused, you are unattached. If you were still meant to remain, Allah would have left questions burning inside you. But instead, the questions faded on their own. That fading is intentional, because Allah knows when clarity would come at the cost of peace, and He always chooses peace for the one who is ready. So if you are tempted to ask, why did this end the way it did? Pause. Not every closed door is meant to be inspected. Some are meant to be respected. The quiet ending without explanation is Allah saying, you don't need to revisit this to move forward. And according to Ibn Arabi, when Allah removes the need for explanation, it is because the soul has reached a level where trust replaces analysis. That is not ignorance. That is surrender. 5. Closure is an inner event, not an external one. Most people wait for closure to arrive from the outside. They wait for an apology, an explanation, a final conversation, a visible ending. They believe peace will come after something happens. But Ibn Arabi teaches something radically different. He teaches that true closure never begins outside you. It happens internally first, silently, long before circumstances change. That is why some people walk away from the same situation peacefully, while others remain trapped in it emotionally for years. Nothing external decides closure, only the heart does. This is why you may still see reminders of what ended, yet feel no pull. You may still remember, yet feel no ache. You may still understand, yet feel no urge to return. This confuses people. They assume something is missing. But Ibn Arabi would say, nothing is missing. Something is finished. External endings are only confirmations of what already occurred inside you. That is why this phase ended quietly. Because the real ending had already happened in your heart. At some point, maybe slowly, maybe without you noticing, your inner dependence dissolved. The emotional charge weakened. The attachment loosened. And once that happened, Allah did not need to create drama outside you. He simply allowed the external world to reflect your internal state. This is a divine law. When the heart releases, reality rearranges itself. That is why closure cannot be forced. That is why no conversation ever truly gives closure. That is why some people never find peace, even after explanations. Because closure is not a dialogue. It is a detachment. Ibn Arabi explains that when Allah resolves something internally, He removes the need for continuation, not just the continuation itself. And once the need is gone, the ending feels natural. This is the key difference between loss and completion. Loss leaves hunger behind. Completion leaves stillness. If this phase ended without noise, it means your heart no longer required it to feel whole. And this is where many people become uncomfortable. Because they equate detachment with coldness. They think peace means they didn't care enough. They worry that calm means something is wrong. But Ibn Arabi makes this clear. The absence of emotional reaction is not indifference, it is resolution. When the heart has learned what it needed, it no longer reacts. It does not resist. It does not negotiate. It does not ache. It simply stops investing energy where it no longer belongs. That is why closure feels quiet. Because it is not an event. It is a realization. You do not wake up one day and declare, I am done. You simply notice that you no longer return mentally. You no longer rehearse conversations. You no longer imagine different outcomes. The story ends inside you first. Only later does the world catch up. And this is crucial to understand. If Allah had not completed this internally, you would still feel pulled. You would still feel unresolved tension. You would still feel unfinished emotion. But you don't. And that is the clearest sign that this ending was not premature. It was precise. So do not seek closure from people who were only part of the lesson. Do not reopen doors that Allah has already sealed within you. Because when closure is internal, revisiting the past does not heal, it disturbs. Honor the quiet, because silence is not emptiness. It is the sound of something being fully resolved. 6. Quiet endings. Protect your dignity. Not every chapter in your life is meant to end publicly. Some endings are not lessons for others. They are private resolutions between you and Allah. Ibn Arabi teaches that Allah is deeply protective of the servant's inner dignity. And when something has shaped you internally, Allah does not expose it externally. This is why some phases end without confrontation, without humiliation, without a story that needs to be told. The ending comes quietly because your dignity was never meant to be negotiated. Many people believe closure must involve explanation to others. They think respect comes from being understood. They feel incomplete if the world does not acknowledge what happened. But Ibn Arabi explains something sharper. True dignity does not require witnesses. When Allah ends something quietly, He is saying, "This was between me and you. No one else needs to know how hard it was. No one else needs to validate your endurance. No one else needs to understand your growth." Because what mattered was not the scene, it was the transformation. Loud endings often strip people of dignity. They invite judgment. They invite opinions. They invite narratives that reduce your experience to something shallow. But a quiet ending seals the experience. It prevents others from interfering with something that was sacred in its struggle. If this phase ended without explanation, without drama, without collapse, it is because Allah refused to let your growth become entertainment. He protected you from being misunderstood. This is something few people recognize. They feel uneasy when something ends quietly because there is no external confirmation, no applause, no sympathy, no validation. But Ibn Arabi teaches that when Allah elevates a servant internally, He often removes the need for external affirmation, because dignity matures when it no longer asks to be seen. This is why you may feel strangely private about what you went through. You don't feel the urge to explain. You don't feel the need to justify. You don't feel like telling the story again. That is not suppression. That is completion. The story does not need to live outside you anymore. And here is a difficult truth. Some things end quietly, because if they ended loudly, others would misunderstand your role in it. They would simplify it. They would mislabel it. They would judge what they never carried. So, Allah ends it silently, not because it was insignificant, but because it was too significant to be mishandled. Quiet endings preserve the sanctity of the lesson. They prevent people from reopening wounds you no longer need to explain. They protect you from reliving what has already been resolved. And according to Ibn Arabi, this protection is not accidental. Allah guards the hearts that have learned deeply. So if you are wondering why this phase ended without confrontation, without closure conversations, without public acknowledgement, understand this. You were not denied dignity. You were spared exposure. Allah did not strip something away from you. He sealed it. And when Allah seals a chapter quietly, it means it has already fulfilled its purpose and it no longer needs a voice. 7. What ends silently creates space loudly. Most people misunderstand silence. They assume silence means nothing is happening. They interpret stillness as delay. They mistake quiet for emptiness. But Ibn Arabi teaches that silence is never neutral. It is active preparation. When Allah ends something without noise, He is not pausing your life. He is clearing space with precision. Noise belongs to transition. Silence belongs to recalibration. Before Allah introduces something new, He first removes what would interfere with it. Not violently, not dramatically, but completely. This is why the ending felt clean. Nothing collapsed. Nothing exploded. Nothing demanded recovery. Because what was removed was no longer structurally necessary. In spiritual terms, Allah does not build on clutter. What ends quietly has already stopped supporting your next phase. That is why the silence feels unfamiliar. You are not in between stages. You are in alignment. Many people panic during this phase. They ask, why does everything feel neutral? Why don't I feel excited or devastated? Why does life feel paused? But Ibn Arabi explains that when Allah creates space intentionally, He does not rush to fill it, because rushing would introduce distortion. Space is not absence. Space is capacity, and capacity must stabilize before it can be filled. This is why the silence feels longer than expected. It is not delay. It is adjustment. Your inner structure is being reconfigured to hold something that cannot coexist with what just ended. If Allah had layered the next phase immediately, you would have carried remnants of the old one into it. That would have weakened both. So Allah removed the old quietly and allowed silence to do its work. Silence is not passive. Silence reorganizes the heart. It strips expectations. It resets desire. It removes urgency. And only after urgency dissolves can clarity arrive. This is one of the most difficult stages for people who equate movement with progress, because nothing visible is happening. But internally, something crucial is occurring. The heart is being taught how not to reach, how not to force, how not to attach prematurely. Ibn Arabi teaches that what comes after silence must be entered without hunger, because hunger distorts reception. If this phase ended loudly, you might still crave replacement. You might still seek compensation. You might still chase resolution. But because it ended quietly, you are learning something subtler. How to stand without needing immediate direction. This is rare, and it is powerful. What follows silence is not always bigger. It is often truer. But truth cannot enter a heart that is still noisy. This is why Allah clears space loudly for some people and quietly for others. The quietly cleared heart is being prepared for something that requires steadiness, not excitement. If you are uncomfortable in this silence, that discomfort is not a sign of misalignment. It is a sign that your old way of measuring progress no longer applies. Previously, you may have relied on feedback, momentum, emotional highs, but now, Allah is teaching you how to recognize progress without stimulation. This is a spiritual threshold. You are being trained to trust stillness. And this is important. Do not rush to fill the space. Do not assign meaning prematurely. Do not label the silence as emptiness. Do not force interpretation, because what ends silently creates space loudly enough for destiny to enter. But destiny does not arrive on demand. It arrives when the space is ready. And readiness is not urgency. It is calm availability. So if everything feels quiet right now, resist the urge to disturb it. This silence is not the absence of direction. It is the final adjustment before direction no longer needs effort. And according to Ibn Arabi, when Allah prepares space this carefully, what enters it does not struggle to stay. It belongs. 8. A quiet divine resolution means no return. Not every ending is meant to be revisited. Some doors close temporarily, inviting reflection. Others close decisively, leaving no echo behind. Ibn Arabi teaches that when Allah resolves a matter quietly, it is not an invitation to reconsider. It is a declaration of completion. A quiet divine resolution does not announce itself because it does not require consent. It does not seek agreement. It does not negotiate. It simply is. This is why there is no internal debate urging you to go back. No compelling urge to reopen the door. No emotional gravity pulling you toward what ended. That absence is not accidental. When Allah closes something gently, He also removes the returning impulse. Because return would not add understanding, it would dilute it. Many people mistake this finality for emotional detachment. They worry that not wanting to return means they didn't value what was lost. But Ibn Arabi explains that finality is not disrespect, it is accuracy. You honor a lesson by not repeating it unnecessarily. A quiet divine resolution means the lesson has been fully absorbed. The experience has integrated into who you are. There is nothing left to extract. Return would only disturb what is already settled. This is why Allah does not always leave signs pointing backward. He does not leave longing. He does not leave unresolved emotion. He does not leave curiosity burning. He leaves stillness. And stillness is not emptiness. Stillness is certainty without language. This is difficult for the mind to accept because the mind is accustomed to cycles. It expects revisits. It expects patterns to repeat. But spiritual completion breaks cycles. It does not loop. It concludes. This is why the ending felt final, without being harsh. If it were meant to reopen, you would feel something unfinished. You would feel doubt. You would feel emotional pressure to check again. But you don't. Instead, you feel neutrality, where attachment once lived. That neutrality is not confusion. It is closure without residue. And according to Ibn Arabi, when Allah removes residue, it means the soul has moved on at a level deeper than thought. This is why forcing a return would feel unnatural. You would feel out of place, disconnected, as if stepping into something that no longer recognizes you. Because the resolution did not just end the situation, it ended your relationship to it. This is a mercy many people do not recognize until much later. They assume finality means loss, but spiritual finality means release from repetition. You are no longer meant to revisit that chapter for growth. It has already contributed everything it was designed to give. This is why Allah closed it quietly. If He had closed it loudly, part of you might still argue. You might still search for alternate outcomes. You might still imagine different versions. But because it closed silently, your imagination did not attach itself to the ending. It accepted it. And acceptance without struggle is one of the highest signs of alignment. So, if you are wondering whether this ending will ever reopen, consider this carefully. The absence of longing is your answer. Divine resolutions that are meant to reopen leave a thread behind. A question. A poule. This one did not, which means it was not meant to continue. Not because you failed, not because something was denied, but because the role it played in shaping you has been fully fulfilled. And once a role is fulfilled, repetition becomes distortion. Allah does not distort what He has perfected. He completes it, quietly, without demand, without return. And when you honor that quiet resolution, you do not lose anything. You carry forward exactly what was meant to stay. Everything else was meant to end. If this phase ended quietly in your life, do not search for pain where Allah placed peace. Do not reopen doors that closed without resistance. Do not force meaning where your heart has already found rest. Silence is not absence, it is completion. According to Ibn Arabi, when Allah resolves a matter gently, it means the soul no longer needs struggle to move forward. Honor that. Not everything is meant to be explained. Not everything is meant to be revisited. Some chapters are fulfilled the moment the heart stops returning to them. If you felt calm instead of grief, certainty instead of longing, stillness instead of confusion, that was not weakness. That was readiness. Allah did not take something from you. He finished something for you. And when Allah finishes a chapter quietly, He does so because what comes next does not require the past to enter. Leave with peace. Carry only what strengthened you. Everything else was meant to end quietly,